Hello there, Pastor Don Sullivan here. I just wanted to take a second and say thank you for watching this sermon recording. I truly hope and pray that it blesses you and encourages you along with your involvement in your local church family. If you find this sermon helpful, please consider donating to Redemption Church on our church website. Again, as you watch this sermon, I hope you are blessed and encouraged, and that your faith in your good Heavenly Father through Jesus Christ, led by the Holy Spirit, is strengthened today.
Well, good morning, everybody. That's a good morning. You guys are excited for some grilling, right? Like, you know what's coming, and so you're like, okay, Don, don't go long today, right? Whatever you do, don't go long today. So, I haven't met you yet. My name's Don, lead pastor here. Thank you for joining us here on our campus. Thank you for joining us online if you're worshiping with us online this morning. You may have noticed that we have some very special, very important guests with us this morning, worshiping with us this morning. Today is Family Worship Sunday. It's a Sunday every quarter where we bring the kids in and we all worship together and in the chaos and in the noise, and I love it. Parents, don't worry about the kids being squirmy and wiggly. That's what kids do. And we love letting kids be kids while we worship together. But we want our kids to grow up seeing how adults worship. We want our kids to kind of experience that. We want them to kind of just worship with their parents every once in a while. And so we do Family Worship Sundays, right? And so what do we do, kids? What do we do every Family Worship Sunday? Right, bad dad jokes. And I've already been told, someone looked at these jokes and they said they're so bad, I'm not even going to get a groan. I don't think they're that bad, all right? So hang in there with me. Here's some jokes for you guys, okay? And adults, you can laugh too. It's okay. You don't have to be a kid, right? So here we go, kids. What can jump higher than a building? A kangaroo, maybe. Anything. A building can't jump. Right? See, I got a groan, Quentin. I'm already ahead of the game, right? You know what my grandpa told me before he kicked the bucket? He said, hey, Don, watch me kick this bucket. Right? You know it has 5 toes and isn't your foot? My foot. All right? Here we go. What kind of music do bunnies listen to at parties? Hip-hop music. All right? That's a good one, right? This one's, I got 2 left and they're thinkers. You're going to hang in there, adults, right? Here we go. Why did the farmer start a career in the music business? Because he had a lot of sick beats. Get it? This one's from my son. What do you call, we live in Campbell County, this is appropriate. What do you call a retired miner? Doug. Now think about that one for a minute, right? Some of you are like, I don't get it. That's okay. All right, that's all right. So let me ask you a question, kids. You got VBS coming up. You get excited about VBS. Make sure that you grab a prayer calendar and just pray us. Kind of count down as we move towards VBS. We're praying every day. Grab one of those. Grab one of these. We're looking for some specific decorations and some help. Take this out, fill it, drop it in the black box, or give it to Josh at Redemption Central on the way out. But let me ask you a question, kids. Why do your teachers make you take tests? Not do you like tests or not. I know the answer to that one. But do you know why your teachers make you take tests? No, not for torture. Tells you where my daughter's attitude is right now, right? It's so that they help you understand what you need to know. They can make sure you know what you need to know. They can make sure you remember what you need to remember. Some kids, is it easy for you to remember? Like, some of us remember things easily. Some of us don't. We have to write it down in 3 different places and set phone reminders because we forget stuff. And don't you hate it when you forget stuff? Like the typical go to the grocery store, and Renee very rarely sends me to the grocery store. Not that I like going to the grocery store, but I come back with like 5 pounds of jerky and sunflower seeds and Diet Mountain Dew and totally forget the milk that I was supposed to buy, right? Because I refuse to take a list. That's just how I handle that. So we forget stuff all the time, all right? And so, but there's a problem with forgetting stuff. Now, what's tomorrow? Everybody knows what tomorrow is, right? Tomorrow's Memorial Day. Memorial Day is kind of an interesting, unique holiday. And if we don't stop and slow down and remember the why of Memorial Day, why do we celebrate Memorial Day? What is it about Memorial Day? We have to do that with every holiday, really, but Memorial Day is a little bit unique. And if we don't slow down and remember Memorial Day, remember, then we too quickly rush off into the parties and the grill outs and the days off. And none of those are bad, not at all. They're important parts of the celebration. But we have to stop first and remember the why. Memorial Day is a day of reflection and mourning. It's a time to stop and remember the men and women who have given their lives, who have died for their country. See, I think this is one of the best pieces of art for Memorial Day that I've ever seen. If you look carefully at it, you'll see some important details. You see just one place setting. You see just one single rose. You see a folded up flag given to the family of a fallen soldier. You see a national cemetery in the background. And it's hard to look at this powerful picture for very long and not kind of be drawn into the pain that haunts this picture. I mean, how do we best honor the fallen soldiers? We best honor them by remembering them, by refusing to forget. Not just to celebrate, but to remember. It's important to remember who they were, but it's even more important to remember why they died. See, if we don't stop and remember, you know what happens if you don't stop and remember? You forget. If you don't remember, you forget. And if we forget, then we're in a very real danger of wasting important things we need to remember from the past. Actually, forgetting is pretty dangerous. Forgetting is dangerous for a country, but it's even more dangerous for a Christian. As a Christian, we must never forget. Bad things happen when we forget the past. Someone said it like this: when we forget, we erase our story and leave blank pages we can't explain, not even to ourselves. When you forget to remember, you erase pages from God's story of you. You create blank pages and empty holes in your heart and mind that should always be filled with stories and memories of just how amazing and good and powerful God has been in your life. Failure to remember is spiritually dangerous. Failure to remember over time can erode the foundation of your relationship with God. That's why in the Bible there are monuments and feasts and celebrations and festivals all over the place. The Bible is filled with God telling His people to remember. God cares deeply about making sure His people don't forget who He is, and they don't forget who they are, and they don't forget what He has done for them. So I want to talk about two examples as we talk about the need to absolutely remember who our God is and what He's done. We're going to look at the story in Exodus 12. Now, you guys know this story. It's an interesting story. It has a lot of connections. But here's the background. If you remember, God's people were in Egypt in horrible, oppressive slavery. God comes to talk to Moses in a burning bush that doesn't get burned up. And He says, Moses, I've heard the cries of my people. I've seen their suffering. So I'm going to come down and rescue them and lead them to a land of life and freedom. I'm going to lead them into my promise. So God sends Moses, His prophet, to the Pharaoh of Egypt to tell the Pharaoh, let my people go. And what does he say, kids? No. Not going to happen. So God sends 9 plagues to get the Pharaoh's attention. Things like flies everywhere, frogs everywhere, all the farm animals dying, horrible sores all over their body, hailstorms destroying crops and property. But the Pharaoh wouldn't listen and kept saying no, so God sends one more horrible plague. Moses tells Pharaoh, if you don't let God's people go, then the firstborn of every family will die. And that's where we're at today. The last plague is coming. So Moses prepares God's people. He tells them what they need to do. He says, find a perfect, spotless lamb, sacrifice it, splash blood around the door of your house, so that when God's angel sees the blood around the door, the angel will pass over the house, and everybody inside will be safe. And that gets us to our story today, Exodus 12, 14 through 28. Listen to what Moses commands his people to do and why he commands it. It says, this day shall be for you a memorial day. And you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations, as a statute forever. You shall keep it as a feast. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven out of your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the seventh day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on these days, but what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your host out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a statute forever. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. If anyone eats what is leavened, that person will be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a sojourner or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your dwelling places. You shall eat unleavened bread. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans and kill the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. None of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you. You shall observe this rite as a statute for you and your sons forever. And when you come into the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised you, you shall keep this service. And when your children say to you, What do you mean by this service? You shall say, It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt, when he struck the Egyptians but spared our houses. And the people bowed their heads and worshipped. Okay? You might have heard this story before. It's a dark, kind of troubling story, but my point this morning is this, is that in the middle of all this, as God's about to act, he commands them to slow down and remember. And from this day on, forever, you must stop and observe this and catch that. When your kids ask you, Why are we doing this, Mom? Why are we doing this, Dad? What's the answer? Because God delivered us, and we are not going to forget that. It's an annual observance, actually several days. But they stopped every year to remember that when God passed over and delivered his people, and we never want to forget God's past faithfulness and deliverance. There's another story that's very similar. We see it in Joshua. At this point, God had delivered his people from Egypt. Moses has died, and now Joshua is leading God's people. And they're finally, after 40 years, they tacked on an extra 40 years of wandering in the wilderness because they disobeyed God. So after an extra 40 years of wandering, they're literally on the edge of the promised land that we just read about. They have to cross the Jordan River. That's the last barrier to enter into the land. And so they stop. And God speaks to Joshua and tells him, Remember when I used Moses to bring my people out of Egypt? Well, today my people are going to know that I'm going to use you, Joshua, to bring them home. They're going to connect the memories of God's past faithfulness with his present blessing and future promise. Because Joshua, you're about to cross the river. You're about to enter a land with many, many strong enemies. You're going to have to conquer these people to get my land for you. But don't be afraid. When you see these enemies and they want to destroy you, don't be afraid. Don't give up. I'm going to get it done for you. I'm going to get it done for my people. And here's how you're going to know. I'm going to give you this amazing sign. Before you enter the land, you have to cross the Jordan River, which at this point was running swift and full. It was swollen, so that means it's tough to cross and dangerous. But Joshua, when just the feet of the priests touch the edge of the water, they're carrying the Ark of the Covenant, the river will stop flowing, and every single one of my people will cross into the promised land on dry ground. Not wet ground, not muddy ground, which still would have been pretty awesome, but completely dry and safe ground. And so that's what God tells Joshua. Joshua begins to move that way. Now we're going to read Joshua 4, 1 through 7. When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, Take 12 men from the people from each tribe, a man, and command them, saying, take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in a place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. And the people of Israel did just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, just as the Lord told Joshua. And they carried them over to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and there they are there to this day. For the priests bearing the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And the people passed over in haste. And when all the people had finished passing over the ark of the Lord and the priests passed before the people. So you get the idea there. God promises Joshua that, remember when my past faithfulness to Moses, I'm going to lead you. You got to cross this river. It's dangerous. But as you go, these 12 men, have one man from each of the 12 tribes, grab a stone from where the priests are standing. Once you crossed, build a monument. Stack those stones up. Why? So that you remember. So that when your kids ask you, Dad, why are these stones stacked here? Your answer is simple, because this is the spot where God did what only God could do for his people. Remember those stories we used to tell you around the dinner table where God moved the waters and everybody just passed? This is one of those spots. This right here. This is where it happened, and we don't ever want to forget that. And this is just two of the many, many examples that God commands his people through monuments like this, through writing things down, through holding festivals and celebrations. They're not all somber celebrations. Most of them are parties, frankly, to remember God's faithfulness. See, we're in this teaching series on God's promises because we called it Because God. As we study these promises, we have to remember them. That's why we're doing it. We can trust God because he's powerful and he has all the wisdom and knowledge there is, and so nothing will keep him from keeping his promise. But if we forget what those promises are, then they're not in our hearts and minds, and they don't have a lot of power to give you courage and strength every day. So it's not that forgetting God's promise is going to keep him from keeping his promises, because nothing can. But if you don't know and forget God's promises, then in tough days and months, there's no strength, there's no encouragement. The words of God don't fill your heart with courage. The words of God, the promises of God, don't fill your mind with strength if you don't remember. And what we remember is what God has done in the past. Memories of God's past faithfulness fuel present courage and fuel future hope. So if you forget what God's done in the past, our present courage that we need goes weak, and we lose a pure hope in God for the future. So God tells Joshua, stack stones, create a physical monument to help you guys remember. There's a picture. I want to show you this picture. Some of you probably know exactly what this is. This is a picture of the Oregon Trail, right? So they used the Oregon Trail between 1811 and roughly 1840. But today, right now, you can go to this place. You can stand right there. You can see the ruts because they were used so much and so deep. Now, you can't see every wagon. You can't see every foot that walked this trail, but you can still see the effects of every wagon and foot some 200 plus years later. Scientists tell us that that's how our minds work. Let me kind of help you understand that. Right now, just sit where you're sitting, or if you're online, take a couple seconds and think about God's faithfulness to you in the past. So just take a couple seconds to think about times you know without a doubt that God has been faithful to you. Think about that for a second. Now, most likely, you remember the big ones, the big events, the crossing of the Jordan, right? But you don't probably remember the small, everyday ways God has been faithful to you over and over again. But even though you can't remember them all, you still have a sense of them, don't you? You still have a sense that God is faithful in the in-between times. You can't remember every detail, but your mind and heart are left with deep, powerful ruts of knowing that God is faithful. That's how our memories work. We can't remember the small stuff, but we know they're there, and we know the big ones, and so we get this sense, this underlying powerful sense that creates a strong connection between you and God. So we need to remember. So the question is, how do we remember? How do we build these ruts of remembering God's faithfulness in our heart and mind? How do we remember? Well, the first one is you have an opportunity to take advantage of where you live, right? You live in Wyoming. Psalm 19:1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Romans 1:20 says, "Creation itself reveals God's invisible qualities, his power, and his eternality, his timelessness." Isaiah 40:26 commands us to lift up our eyes and look to the heavens, and we'll see the awesome creative power of our great God. You live in Wyoming, look around you. Just look around you. Every once in a while, if you need to remember, you start to question, okay, things are going bad, God, I need some help. Just stop and look around you. Or feel the wind. Because it's windy here, right? So, I don't know about you, but wind gives me a bad attitude. It does, drives me nuts. But to stop and feel the powerful wind and go, that helps me remember the power of God. The invisible, eternal, but perfect power of God. So when you need to remember, just stop and look around. Stop and look up. Stop and look down. See what God has done. Number two, you have to remember you need to read. The Bible is the story of God. The Bible, this book right here, is the only record we have of God. This book tells you who God is. This book tells you God loves you. This book tells you how to think and pray and struggle and doubt and believe. This book tells you Jesus died and lives for you. This book contains all the promises God has for you. So what that means is if you don't know this book, then you don't know God's story of your life. You don't know God's promises to you. And if you don't know this book, you can't know Jesus. Not really. So read it. Wrestle with it. Be confused by it. But spend time every day. Great place to start. If you're not reading anything right now, start reading just a psalm a day. And that'll tell you how to ask God, how to struggle, how to doubt, how to cry out, how to praise. If you're not reading anything, I would say start with just simply reading a psalm a day. But to remember, you have to know the stories. You have to read. And then to remember, we worship. That's why we worship together. The songs we sing, they talk about the salvation of Jesus Christ. They help us remember who he is. Every time we gather as Jesus' church, we worship him together, first for who he is and then for what he alone has done. Together, when we come together, we sing and we remember he is our King and Savior. So when we worship, we are remembering. Practically speaking, you need to learn to stack stones, right? Now, not literally, although that might not be bad, but we do it all the time. I mean, think about it. What's the Lincoln Memorial? What's the Washington Monument? What's the Vietnam Memorial? They're just stacked, carved stones. That's what they are. They're there to help the people of the United States remember where we came from and remember what we hold dear and remember what it took to build it. Well, you and I need to stack some stones. We need to stack some spiritual and emotional stones to help us remember God's past faithfulness. You know what I realized? It kind of hit me differently this week as I was writing the sermon and studying. Like, it kind of, remembering is a physical thing. I mean, we talk about it as a mental thing, like I forgot. But if we only ever use our brains to remember, you're going to forget. If we only use our brains to remember, you're going to forget. We need to add some stuff to the actual memories that creates physical places, physical touch points, emotional touch points that help us remember. That's why Moses told God's people to tell the story every time they have this feast. That's why Joshua stacks stones. So what can you do? What works for you to stack stones in your heart and mind? Maybe it's simply writing them down. Maybe it's 5 minutes of, okay, this is where God's been faithful. This is where I saw God. This is where I didn't feel anything. It was a bad day, and I didn't feel God's presence with me today, but I know that He promises to be there with me even if I can't feel it. So write it down. Maybe it's we're in a digital age, maybe it's taking a picture. I saw someone the other day who journals their day with pictures. I thought, wow, that's really powerful. Like to take small pictures that you can help you remember God's faithfulness. Maybe, did you notice in these stories that there's an element of helping future generations remember? The idea was do these things so your kids ask you questions. So help your kids find ways to remember. Every once in a while, take your kids to ice cream and talk to them about the stories of the Bible, right? So kids, you have my permission. Tell your parents, tell your grandparents, take me to ice cream and tell me about Jesus. Take me to ice cream and tell me about God delivering His people. Maybe the best $5-6 you spend, right? But help your kids remember. Whatever works for you, start stacking the stones of memories this week.